Thank you so much for coming. I'm always so surprised when the room fills up. All right, let me not get in the way of my slides. I swear I've done this before. So thank you so much for having me back. Last year I was the first talk on this track, and I was made entirely of technical difficulties. So think of this as another opportunity to get it right. My name is Eva Galperin. I work for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, where I am the director of cybersecurity. The good news is that there are lots of people here who already know what EFF is, which saves me a lot of time. We're basically a sticker and t-shirt company with a law firm attached. So, who am I? I direct all of the cybers. Essentially what this means is that for a very long time I worked on EFF's international team, and I spent a lot of time worrying about privacy and security all over the world. This year, things are a little bit different. I have been granted my own lab. We call this EFF Threat Lab, and I have a team of people who work for me, and we spend all of our time worried about security and privacy for especially vulnerable populations. So I started my career trying to expand the idea of vulnerable populations to include activists all over the world, and then journalists and NGOs working in sketchy places like the United States. And finally, I've spent the last year working on domestic abuse cases, so fighting stalkerware and spyware. So when people are offered software, or they buy software in order to spy on their spouses or their loved ones as part of domestic abuse, that's really one of the things that I've been tracking and trying to eliminate because it's terrible. So I'm going to go over really quick who EFF is. One more time, everybody, hands up if you've heard of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, my beloved t-shirt and sticker company with a law firm attached. In addition to occasionally filing lawsuits and making a series of excellent t-shirts and stickers, EFF make sure that when you go online, your rights come with you. And one of the most important parts of our work is acknowledging that the internet is global and that the internet's problems are global, and you're not just going to solve it with lawyers located in San Francisco. And in fact, one of the biggest problems that technology has really had, I think, in the last several decades is that our platforms and a lot of the law and a lot of the decisions that influence our daily digital lives are made by people who don't understand the lives of people who are not like them. So they're generally made by middle-class white guys living in Santa Clara. And middle-class white guys in Santa Clara don't understand the problems of people who are not middle-class white guys living in Santa Clara, which is almost everybody else in the world. So in addition to doing this sort of activism and broadening our idea of who is online and who deserves respect and consideration when we're making tech policy and laws, we also do legal work. I personally have an entire floor of angry American attack lawyers, and they love nothing more than to file lawsuits. EFF is very popular at hacker conferences because a lot of people consider them to be their emergency lawyers if they get caught. We have a thing called the Coders' Rights Project, where if you are doing security research and you are concerned about the legality of what you're doing, or that you want to talk about your research, but you are concerned that you are going to be sued by the makers of the product that you are researching, or the company that you are researching, or a government whose malfeasance you are uncovering, we are the people that you go to in advance, not after you have already given your talk, but before, and we can give you advice about how to do this safely and securely, and also we can arrange for you to get legal representation in the case that somebody comes after you. We also do some activism. One of the things that I'm particularly proud of is that the EFF has been suing the United States government over its warrantless wiretapping program, which was carried out by the National Security Agency since 2006. The program has been going on since 2003. We've been suing them since 2006. We are now in year 13 of suing them because the wheels of justice grind slowly. But we think it's extremely important to hold governments accountable, and especially for this sort of mass surveillance, which violates everybody's civil rights all over the world and takes advantage of the fact that the United States has this central role in the physical layout of the internet. So much stuff goes through, so much traffic goes through the U.S. That the NSA was, and still is, in a sort of special position when it comes to being able to spy on everything. One of the other things that we do in terms of activism is we've done activism against the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which is the law in the United States under which hackers are generally prosecuted. And we found that this is also the law which is used to prosecute people who are doing perfectly innocent security research when the targets of their research don't like what they're doing. And again, finally, we do international work because the internet is international. Its problems are global. One of the things that I spent a couple of years doing was working on changes in 2013 to the Wassenaar Arrangement, which it took me a very long time to spell correctly. The Wassenaar Arrangement is an agreement between, I think, 49 countries all over the world, and it usually governs the export of weapons. But when a whole bunch of stories hit about the use of surveillance malware made by companies like FinFisher and Gamma International, FinFisher is a spin-off of Gamma. And Hacking Team and NSO groups, all of these stories came out, and then a bunch of European MEPs said something must be done. And what we should do is we should classify surveillance malware as a weapon. And it should be governed by these export controls. And security researchers took one look at that and said, "What? Excuse me? You're going to make me get an export license in order to use my compiler or do any kind of research across international borders? My life is about to get a whole lot more difficult." So we spent some time trying to roll that back because we think that this language was especially poorly written. EFF also has a technology team. We spend a bunch of time working on technology projects that we think are going to make the internet better for everybody. So some of you may be familiar with CertBot. If you run a website and you have a free cert that allows you to support HTTPS, it probably came from CertBot. You're welcome. We also make the browser extensions Privacy Badger, which eats cookies because it doesn't care, and HTTPS Everywhere, which makes sure that when you are going to a website, if it supports HTTPS, that you're doing so by default. So, usually when I start talking about our work around activists and journalists and lawyers, I need to start with why do we need to care about these people? And primarily the reason why we need to care about journalists and activists and lawyers, why these are particularly vulnerable populations, is because these are the populations that speak truth to power. These are the people who keep power in check. And as a result, they piss off people in power. And people in power are extremely interested in knowing what they're doing. One of the things that's really changed a lot in the last couple of decades is that it used to be hard to spy on journalists and activists and lawyers. If you wanted to know what they were doing, you had to, say, break into their homes. You had to convince their family members to snitch on them. You had to go and steal their notebooks. But now everyone conveniently carries a tracking device around in their pocket. As well as conducting nearly all of their business in the digital realm, which makes it unusually easy for governments to track it. So this sort of surveillance is widely, near universally beloved by abusive governments. So this is Barrett Brown, who had the very interesting distinction of being both a journalist and a hacker who had to go and spend some time in jail because he wanted to protect his sources. I keep him in there because frequently when we start talking about the mistreatment of journalists and activists, it is really common in the United States to pretend that this is something that happens in other people's countries, that the world is divided up into the West and the rest, and that the U.S. is great and we have the First Amendment and we have all kinds of great rights, and then meanwhile there are all of these other lesser countries and they're running around engaging in human rights abuses. I am here to tell you the U.S. engages in plenty of human rights abuses, and it's extremely important to hold them accountable just as well as everybody else. So, the thing that concerns me greatly is seafood, but also asymmetry. I hate bullies. I became an activist because I really hate bullies, and I can't stand to watch people in power kick down at the people who are supposed to keep them in check. It is really common for journalists and activists and people working at NGOs not to really have much in the way of digital protection. When governments spy on other governments, when governments spy on professional spies, they have tradecraft. They have training. They have entire government support systems for their work. Journalists don't have a huge security team that can spend all of its time supporting them in their security concerns. Activists don't have like a 6-person security team that they can call whenever their phone is doing something funny. Lawyers don't have somebody that they can call when something weird is happening on their computer. And that makes them really easy to own. Because so far, pretty much the only people that they have to call are like EFF and Citizen Lab. So one of the things that I would like to say about the project that I'm about to describe is that work is not done by heroic individual rock stars. The work that I am about to describe was done in a team. It was done in a large group in collaboration. So the people who really did a whole lot of the work are not me. They are people like Michael Flossman from Lookout, Andrew Blake from Lookout, and my fabulous colleague Cooper Quinton, whom I am especially fond of. So we all had to work together in order to make this happen. And if anybody ever brings you a project this big and acts like it just sprung like Athena from the head of Zeus, and that they are personally responsible for it and aren't they so cool, look for the people who are standing behind them. Nobody does this stuff alone. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about dark Caracal. This is a Caracal. It is a wild cat native to the Middle East, and you will see in a bit why I've decided to name my APT after a kitty. We have them yet. Huh? We have them in the US. Oh, fantastic! So, a little bit about dark Caracal. There's a Caracal, there's some background. It all started with this other cat. This is a Manul, or a palace cat, or an adorable cartoon of a Manul or a palace cat. This cat is native to the steppes of Kazakhstan, and probably about in 2015, 2016, I was contacted by by a lawyer who was working with a group of people who had angered the government of Kazakhstan, and they were getting some strange emails with some amusing attachments. And so we spent some time analyzing them. We found their C2s, we found all their malware, and we wrote it up in a report. So we were extremely proud of ourselves because this was a very noisy, kind of not very sophisticated APT. It was fairly clear to us that it was Kazakhstan because we had a fairly good idea of who was being targeted, and it was entirely people who were being sued by the government of Kazakhstan because they were enemies of the ruling party. And we thought it was these guys. Yes. So we thought it was hackers for hire, and that the hackers for hire were Indian, that they were APIN. APIN is an extremely noisy actor. They were for hire for just about anybody with $2 to rub together. And as a result, there were many IP addresses and many domains that were associated with APIN as an actor. What we ended up discovering was, nope, not them. It turns out that the story was in fact much, much weirder. Which brings us to Dark Caracal. So one day, I'm sitting around the office at EFF, and we get a phone call from a couple of security researchers at Lookout. And they tell us, hey, we have found a bunch of other stuff that overlaps with your CNCs, and we think that it's the same actor, only it's not targeting this group of Kazakhs and people who are being sued or who are suing the government of Kazakhstan. It's this whole other group over here. Fortunately, they've left their CNCs wide open. My colleague Cooper said, hey, the last time that we were working on this, they left their CNCs wide open, and in fact, they left all their directories wide open, and we managed to pull all the data off their CNCs. You don't think they've done that again, have they? Yes. Yes, they have. I track only the most incompetent APTs. So here are the things that we found in Operation Manual, because we pulled down all of this information. We pulled down secure messaging, Signal, WhatsApp, Primo plus Messenger, all kinds of weird stuff. What they were using were these sort of Trojanized apps that they would then sideload. So nearly all of this was Android malware, and it was designed to look like all of these really common apps that people use in their everyday lives, especially if they're interested in avoiding governments. So you get stuff like Signal and WhatsApp, or Orbot and Siphon, and then you've got a couple of like things that everybody uses, like Google Play, and things that nobody should use, like Flash Player. So again, we managed to exfiltrate all of this data. The malware that we found has a whole bunch of capabilities. It could take photos with the front or back camera. It intercepted incoming text messages. It could retrieve your GPS data, silently record audio with the device microphone, retrieve your contacts, scan nearby Wi-Fi access points and exfiltrate information about them, including their BSSID, SSID, authentication key management, encryption schemes, signal strength and frequency. You've got the device metadata, the text messages. It will send an SMS to an attacker at a specified number so that it can take advantage of the fact that you trust the person whose device you've just owned. It will retrieve messages and any corresponding decryption keys from messaging apps and retrieve a list of installed packages, bunch of other stuff. So generally, once you own a phone, you own a phone. You gain many, many powers. You have many things that you can exfiltrate. This should be the attack vectors. Here we go. So the primary attack vector was phishing messages. So you would get these messages. They would come in through WhatsApp. They would say, "Hey, install this new version of WhatsApp over at this Play Store that is not actually the Play Store," which, given who was being targeted, was not that unusual. In the United States, usually you see a lot of criticism of this particular attack vector, and you say, well, who is going to use an unlicensed Play Store? To which I usually say, the rest of the world. So the phishing message says, go to this server, pull down a new copy of WhatsApp. In this particular case, it was secureandroid.info. Very secure. The other attack vector that we saw were phishing messages. So there would be a Facebook group belonging to somebody that they were targeting, and they would say, everybody on this Facebook group, go get your new updated WhatsApp over here on the phishing server. Or they would just send like fake phishing messages in order to gather Facebook credentials. And then all of these things work together. It's the circle of life. The other thing that we saw when we looked over the messages was physical access. So more than once we saw evidence that somebody had actually gotten a hold of one of these phones, and through physical access had managed to install the new Trojanized application. And the C2 server that was being used there was androidadobe.net. So how did we know that physical access was being used? We saw messages like this. Stuff that says, how are you? And then a link. And then you can download from here to communicate better. Or, hello, I got my phone back. Please use this number for text and phone. Thank you. So obviously somebody had taken this victim's phone, installed the new Trojanized copy of WhatsApp, and then given them their phone back. So this is a screenshot of secureandroid.info. My personal favorite part right here is quality is better than the original. I can't make this stuff up. So one of the things that we really saw about the malware that was being used in this campaign was that it uses no exploits. It is really common for us to talk about state actors like they're extremely sophisticated, like they're sitting on a mountain of Ode, like they're, magical wizards. You don't need to be a magical wizard. It turns out that you could just social engineer and then copy and paste from Stack Overflow. So they did in fact use a bunch of copying and pasting from Stack Overflow. They used some C2 obfuscation. The exfiltration implementation totally copied from Stack Overflow. And they made some really minor modifications to publicly available code. What's the most important takeaway from this, aside from that it didn't seem to be extremely competent work, is that it does not have to be extremely competent to be effective. This stuff still worked, even though I would barely let these guys pass, like, freshman CS. So, what did we find? We found some interesting connections to FinFisher. I don't know if you guys remember FinFisher, but FinFisher is sort of fancy, bespoke surveillanceware. Not quite as fancy as the sort of stuff you would find in Five Eyes, so like in the hundreds of thousands, low millions kind of range. And so we found some stuff that did not appear in previous dumps of FinFisher. We found a bunch of mobile endpoints, and specifically we found mobile endpoints with Kazakhstan's calling code and a package compilation time from around the same dates that we were seeing Operation Manual going on. Meanwhile, we also saw the sort of the same attacks on desktops. So you have to understand that all of this Android stuff was extremely, complicated, and getting through the desktop bit was a little hard. We discovered that they used chained zero-day exploits pivoting access off of compromised SCADA systems, and we're using the blockchain for exfiltration. It was really, really complicated. I'm not sure that I can explain it to you. Oh, wait, it was phishing. It's always phishing. There is never a time when it is not phishing. These people were dumb as rocks. So let's talk a little bit about the infection vectors that they were using for their desktop malware. They were using infected documents, which we're fairly certain they were sending over email, even though we did not actually see the emails. There were infected Word Excel documents and PDFs. They were taking advantage of macros. If you are running an environment that still has macros turned on, please, for God's sake, turn that shit off. And at one point, they even had an infected CHM file running PowerShell, which I thought was extra super weird. But there it was. And in fact, here it is. Exciting. So the desktop malware that they were using was called Banduq. It was originally observed as part of Operation Manual, and this is, we found a new variant being used by Dark Caracal. I have been told it is the Hindi word for gun, and also Lebanese Arabic for bastard. This malware is modular. It works on Windows. It's available for sale online. But the versions that we found appear to be a private and early copy. It's also heavily obfuscated, and it was found in Trojanized copies of a drawing program and circumvention software, Siphon, which we talked about a little bit earlier, which we also saw being used in the mobile attacks. All the malware-related Windows API strings were encrypted and base64 encoded. Banduq decrypts them at runtime. Then the second stage is encrypted and stored in a binary resource with an 8-character name. The resource binary is decrypted and injected into the iExplorer.exe process using a technique called process hollowing. And the second stage is packed with a custom version of UPX. So, boring. Here's the communication with the C2s. Again, not super complicated. More C2 communication. Exactly the same as the Palace mobile malware, so we think maybe these things are related. And then here are all the things that Banduq can do. So you can capture the screen, you can get the Wi-Fi, you can start a shell, you can get keys, you can inject all kinds of stuff. So the usual sort of, hey, I've got root on a desktop. We also found another malware family, which we call Crossrat. So far, we've only seen Dark Caracal use it. Version 0.1 was released in March of 2017. It had limited features. It's written in Java, which means cross-platform targets. It works in Windows, OS 10, and Linux. It had no obfuscation, no packing. It installs itself for persistence, and again, no exploits. Fancy. This is clearly a picture of the hacker doing his hacking thing. Again, communication with the C2 is over plaintext TCP. Super, super simple, and it looks like this. Now, I mentioned earlier that we found the Dark Caracal C2s, and the first thing that my genius coworker asked was, hey, you don't think that they were as stupid this time as they were the previous time and left all their directories open, do you? And the answer was yes. And boy, did we exfiltrate a whole lot of data. I'm here to tell you about this data. All right. So, the first thing that we did was we geolocated all the compromised devices. And we found that they were located all over the world. You may see that there's sort of a bit of a cluster in the Middle East, but we also see several in the United States and Canada, not to be left out. This is the split of the exfiltrated content on adobeair.net, one of the C2s. As you can see, about half Windows, half Android. Most of the most recent stuff was coming in on Android, which is consistent with our experience of them sort of moving more heavily into mobile. All right, I don't even know what this is. Here we go. So, we pulled a whole bunch of stuff. We pulled desktop screenshots, Skype logs and DBs, personal photos, iPhone backups, like an entire iPhone backup unencrypted that took forever to get through, corporate and legal documentation, all kinds of extra super sensitive stuff. And these are examples of the kind of messages that we were seeing, which include stuff like bank routing numbers, which I've redacted here. Because I'm not a jerk. This is an overview of the exfiltrated data from the Android campaigns. As you can see, we had about 250,000 files, about 500,000 texts, mostly in Arabic. We had about 1,500 authentication accounts, and about 200,000 unique Wi-Fi SSIDs. Pay close attention, this will be on the test later. So as you can see, this is the infrastructure. Here's a bunch of the domains that they were using. This stuff will also be useful later. Again, adobeair.net shows up. Why do we care about adobeair.net? One of the interesting things that we learned was that all of the C2s being used by this particular actor were Windows machines, which is extremely unusual in this space. You usually see C2s running Linux. And furthermore, they were running a very particular set of services, which allowed us to fingerprint them. It's almost as if they were using Clippy to set up their C2s. So, if we take a closer look at adobeair.net, we can see that it was, the fingerprint included, XAMPP for Windows 5.6.31, Apache 2.4.26, MariaDB 10.1.25, et cetera, et cetera. The whole idea is like, this is a very particular fingerprint. There aren't a lot of machines running this particular set of services. That made them really easy to find. As you can also see, they ran some very interesting domains. They ran some domains that were made to look like Twitter. Here's their pretty good mock-up of the Twitter login page. Here's their pretty good mock-up of the Facebook login page. And as you can see, this is one of the Facebook groups that they were using to spread all of their links. The other phishing domains included facebookservices.org, gmailservices.org, Twiter, I guess, only one T. The English language has bizarre spellings, .org. All these domains have been sinkholed because we are not stupid. Meanwhile, we went ahead and we took a look at the C2 servers. We found control panels for multiple campaigns using various malware that included IrisRat, Banduke, and ArcomRat. And we found these servers hosting exfiltrated desktop content. So much exfiltrated desktop content. Seriously, please stop taking selfies. This shows the HTTP 200 OK response codes for the server and the payload. Each of the directories contained a login panel for a different rat. So many, many, many different rats sitting on these C2s. Who was behind all this? So we went ahead and we started with the first email address, which was used to register the domains, and it was op13.mail.com. This was sort of key to linking a whole bunch of the infrastructure together. Sort of dark Caracal group was using a number of different personas, including Nancy Razouk, Hassan Ward, Hadi Meze, and Rami Jabber. Nancy Razouk is an actual journalist. The phone number that she used or the phone number which is associated with her, is an actual phone number in Lebanon, and it belongs to somebody who's really tired of security researchers calling them. Hadi Meze is another one of the identities that was used to register all of these domains. Rami Jabber registered the domain ArabLiveNews.com, and the WHOIS address information is in close proximity to where we had seen the test devices. We haven't quite gotten around to where all of this stuff is. So, you may have gotten the idea from a lot of the personas that are being used that somebody is really interested in the Middle East, and somebody is super interested on spying on people in the Middle East, and particularly spying on their desktops and their cell phones. But where are these people? Because people all over the world are interested in spying on the Middle East. It's just an interesting place. Where in the world is Dark Caracal? We started with trying to sort of narrow things down. So here's the whole world. And then we started with some SSIDs. And the way that we got them was this. So we went ahead and we pulled all of the GPS data from the SSIDs that were associated with the infected phones. And we got two clusters. One appeared to be a cluster of victims, but the other looked like a cluster of test devices. So, where are all the test devices located? Here we go. This is the SSID. There's the MAC address. Here we go. They're all located on one street in Beirut, Lebanon. Now, anybody who has ever tried to use GPS in order to navigate their way across the city knows that GPS is not 100% accurate, which is why you have this whole sort of spread of blue dots. And so, in the interest of figuring out exactly where these test devices are all located, I sent someone to Beirut with a copy of Waggle, looking for the SSIDs in question. And in this particular case, the SSID that they were looking for was BLD3F6, or Building 3, Floor 6. Where is it? It's right here. It's this orange building. What does this orange building do? For one thing, we're fairly certain it's this orange building because notice it is the only building for quite a ways around that even has the right number of floors. And as it turns out, there's a big label on the front of the building that tells us exactly who it is, and it's the General Directorate of General Security of Lebanon in Beirut, which is basically their equivalent to the CIA and the FBI, because why keep them separate? You can do it all at once. So, we can't tell you that the actor behind Dark Caracal is the Lebanese government. We can't even tell you that it's the GDGS. We can, however, tell you that the call is coming from inside the house. What can we learn from all this? The first thing is that cyber warfare is getting cheaper. What we're seeing here is an actor that is not really using premium products anymore. In fact, it looks like they started by calling FinFisher and maybe using a few of their products, and then they're like, this is all very complicated. How about if instead of that, we could just use this series of portals being used by an administrator in this one building in Beirut. You can also see that they have moved to mobile as a primary attack vector. And also that if you use very common C2s and sort of off-the-shelf malware, that it enables you to hide in the noise of misattribution for many years. They suspect nothing. So, one of the other things that we can learn from this is it leaves us with sort of a mystery. Why would these people who are spying on enemies of the government of Kazakhstan also be located in this building in Beirut and be spying on all of these people who are interesting to the government of Lebanon? I have a theory. And my theory is that what we're looking at is a third party that is selling a portal to various governments. So if you cheap out and you decide that that FinFisher is too expensive and that Hacking Team is too expensive and the NSO group is too rich for your blood, as when you read through the Hacking Team emails, you discover that using these products is actually kind of complicated. And if you want tech support, you need people who speak English, or who, have some sort of technical background. If you don't have all of that going for you, and you just want some, monkey to sit at a computer and push buttons in order to do spying, then you hire these guys. And we're fairly certain that they sold to both Lebanon and Kazakhstan, and furthermore, that they still exist. what has happened in the year since this report was published? We have a couple of updates. The first is that Major General Abbas Ibrahim, the Director General of the GDGS, read our report. And he said the general security does not have these type of capabilities. We wish we had these kind of capabilities. Then an official source in the public security told Al-Akbar, the paper, that the director has the ability to spy on any other device in the world, but we wish we had a small part in the capabilities that the report attributes to us. The source added that this report was part of a political campaign aimed at public security because of its role in protecting Lebanese security from Israeli incursions. So basically, watch out, I am a tool of the Zionist regime. And finally, my beloved Building 3, Floor 6 SSID was in fact finally taken down. So whoever is inside the building is now using a different SSID, or maybe even running his portals out of someplace else. If you're interested in learning more about Dark Caracal as an actor or Operation Manuel as an actor, the research reports are available at these fine URLs. And normally, this is the part where I tell you about how important it is that people do this kind of research. Because if you do this kind of research, it's not very sophisticated, it's not very sexy, it's actually kind of tedious, but it is exactly the stuff that allows us to speak truth to power. This is the stuff that keeps governments from getting away with spying on activists and journalists, from, kidnapping and firebombing dissidents, from spying on scientists as they did using NSO Group's Pegasus malware in Mexico, as well as the people who were in charge of finding out what happened to dozens of missing and murdered students. This stuff is really important, and people who are working at security companies and at AV companies are not necessarily going to make this kind of research their priority, because journalists and activists don't buy fancy threat feeds. They don't buy expensive reports. And they're never going to be your bread and butter. You can't build a business off of this kind of research. But if this is the work that you do, it is extremely important to make it public, because it is for the public good. And you are the people in this room who have the knowledge and the resources to make that happen, because you work for companies or governments, or platforms that have the telemetry that let you see when these kinds of abuses are happening. And it is on you to speak up when you see this kind of misuse, when you see journalists being targeted, or when you see activists being targeted. Because honestly, nobody else is going to do it. There's a reason why these kinds of reports get published by EFF, Citizen Lab, maybe the occasional university. Once or twice you'll see something come out of like Kaspersky or CrowdStrike. But for the most part, not a lot of people do this work. And we need help, because I can't do it alone. It's extremely tiring. And honestly, most of the people in this room are probably better at it than I am. I had to tweet this morning because EFF's virus total sort of professional account it has expired, and now we need to pay our bills. So now I need somebody to provide me with an enterprise level VT account. Ask me what kind of fancy intel I'm doing with no virus total enterprise account. Not a whole lot. So this work is hard, and we need your help. The other point that I wanted to make is that what you do matters. A lot of people are coming here with their resumes, and they want somebody to review their resumes. I will be doing resume reviews tomorrow. People are coming here looking for jobs, and the InfoSec industry pays really well. You have a very particular set of skills. But the people who are willing to pay you the most money for those skills do not want you to rescue kittens from trees. If they're willing to pay you that much money, they probably want you to do something bad. And I want you to think about the work that you do every day and the choices that you make when you're trying to decide which job you're going to take. You don't have to help facilitate human rights abuses. And in fact, if you do, just imagine me standing here judging you, if that helps. And if enough people get up and say, we're not going to facilitate human rights abuses, we're not going to work for the Finfishers and the hacking teams and the Gamma groups and the NSO groups and the black cubes of the world, then we can really make a difference. And if we take those jobs and then we say, if I don't do it, somebody else is going to do it, let it be somebody else. Don't make human rights abuses easier for governments to carry out. Don't carry their water for them. Don't do their work for them. Make them work really hard to find somebody to do their evil deeds, because it's really important that InfoSec have some ethics. When we take computer science classes, before we even learn how to write Hello World, we should take an ethics class. And that's something that doesn't happen in computer science departments all over the world. Instead, we sort of pride ourselves on being the people who break the rules, the people to whom laws don't particularly matter. We are the mavericks of the world. But ethics are extremely important. And you are powerful in ways that I think you don't necessarily appreciate right now. And we absolutely cannot do it without you. Thank you very much.
Oh yeah, we have still 10 minutes. So
man, questions.
So Eva, you will be there at the Black Hat or DEF CON EFF's desk. Mm-hmm. Last year we had Ethics Village in DEF CON. Were you there by any chance?
I was not in the Ethics Village because I was drinking. But you should have ethics. Absolutely. Yeah, I am very excited about the advent of the Ethics Village, and I've been going to DEF CON for since 1999. So it was the dawn of time. Dinosaurs were roaming the Alexis Park, and there I was. If you have the opportunity, please come to DEF CON. And if you do happen to come to DEF CON, every year EFF does an Ask EFF panel where about half a dozen of us get up on stage, and you can ask us whatever you want. So, like this, only with lawyers.
So, having ethics in place before we start learning programming is a very powerful message that you have given. So, I, being part of null community, will look into it, how we can work on it. Okay, and I will report you back when we meet in DEF CON this year.
Fantastic.
Cool. Friends, do you have any questions? We have 7 more minutes.
I have answered all the questions. I'm just that good.
Yeah, there's a question.
All right.
How can you contribute to EFF? Like you said, you need the
Oh, there are so many ways in which you can contribute to EFF.
So my favorite way is to buy stickers and the t-shirts, the cool t-shirts they have.
So, we have 40,000 members all over the world. We are a membership-driven organization. The people who are our members are the people who pay my rent. And I think that's extremely important, as does my landlord. And one of the ways in which you can join us is you can just become a member. You can become a member at a slightly higher level, and we will send you t-shirts and stickers, the most important thing that EFF does. If you want to get really ambitious, we will send you a hoodie, which is a very basic piece of clothing that you cannot cross San Francisco without a hoodie. We give you, it's required. And you can also join our mailing list. If you go to www.eff.org, right there's a big red button which will allow you to subscribe to our mailing list. You can read our many, many blog posts about all of the issues that we think are important on the internet. You can also go to our Action Center, where we have people fill out all kinds of requests to various people in government. This is where we yell at companies. This is where we yell at the FTC, and other people in power. And sometimes yelling at people in power is the way to make activism happen. So you too can be this person. So, supporting EFF is not just about money. There are all kinds of other things you can do. I understand that not everybody has tons and tons of money, but the people who don't have tons and tons of money have at least a little bit of time. And if you have that time, you can read our website and stay up to date on our issues.
Any more questions? Yeah. You want to shout out or should I throw the mic?
Eva, hi. I'm sure everybody in the room's heard about what's happening with encryption in Australia.
Yes.
Right? Have you had any people talking to EFF about that? People who work as developers in other countries, and how should they deal with it?
Yes. So, as a quick bit of background for what is happening with encryption all over the world. Usually this is an entire 45 minute long talk. But the too long don't read is that in the United States, the FBI has been complaining about what it calls going dark, much like this screen over here. And they say that people are using end-to-end encrypted messengers to send information to each other, and because they cannot decrypt the contents of these messages, the FBI is not able to solve crimes. You can tell that this is really genuine because clearly all criminal criminal finding activity by the FBI has ground to a halt over the years. So every once in a while the American government says this, and then EFF has to rise up and kill this bad idea. Meanwhile, other countries have also decided that this is a great idea. So Russia has passed a law requiring companies to backdoor their end-to-end encrypted communications. But the only way in which they can really exert pressure is with companies based in Russia. And then it turns out that the number of companies offering end-to-end encrypted communication services based out of Russia is in the sort of zeros. Surprise. Same for China. But other countries have decided to get in on the game. So a couple years ago, the British passed the Investigatory Powers Act, which gives the British government the power to secretly order a company that does business in the UK that has, I think, more than 30,000 British users to secretly backdoor its end-to-end encrypted services in order to allow them to spy on somebody that they think has done something bad. And the same thing has recently passed in Australia. And so now one of the things that we're really concerned about is that the Australian and British governments are going to these large companies that provide end-to-end encrypted services and forcing them to secretly backdoor their products and gagging them so that we will never know about it. This is extremely worrisome. This is actually one of the reasons why my colleague Nate Cardozo recently left EFF and went to go work for Facebook, which I will never stop making fun of him about. And it's largely because he's concerned that the British and Australian governments are going to exert this kind of pressure on WhatsApp. And WhatsApp is used by like 2 billion people. So if you can protect the integrity of WhatsApp, you can do a lot of good in the world. This is also one of the reasons why I encourage people to use Signal and why the existence of Signal in the ecosystem is so important, because Signal is open source. And so you can actually check all of the code. I mean, most of us won't, and most of us are not, PhDs in cryptography, but we could, and that's the important thing. So if there are any changes, they will immediately be detected, and there will be much gnashing of teeth and tearing of hair. does that cover enough of we've spent a lot of time thinking about this and being very angry about it. I wrote a bunch of things to the British and the Australian government. Mm-hmm. Well, I would start by pulling all of my servers and employees out of Australia. One of the ways in which I would push back on this sort of thing in India is say, well, how do you feel about companies pulling all their people out of your country? You want technology in your country, presumably because it's going to employ a bunch of Indians. If you want servers, if you want jobs, you can't require people to secretly backdoor encryption because nobody will put their servers in your country and nobody will employ people in your country because they're not trustworthy. Anybody else?
So, we have last 1 minute.
Very last question. Who wants to do it?
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Electronic Frontier Foundation is hiring. Currently, we have 2 legal positions open, 1 executive assistant position open, and we are hiring a JavaScript developer. So lots of interesting stuff in the mix. But if you keep an eye out on our on the jobs page at www.eff.org, you will see that we've always got like 3 or 4 positions open because now there's like 100 of us, and so there are always opportunities. If you're interested in one of these specific opportunities that it's on the website, you can come and talk to me afterwards, and I would be happy to introduce you to the right people.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.